everybody. I just wanted to talk to you today a little bit about what it means to incorporate whole foods into your life. And I think foods in general can be one of the most important things we can do for all aspects of our life, including sleep and exercise and our mental and emotional outlook on life, our relationships with other people. Food can have a direct impact on all of these pillars that we're going to be talking about. So I think the number one thing when it comes to choosing more whole foods is to look at the nutrient density of the food. And typically, if you're choosing whole foods, meaning foods that are whole and not processed, then those foods are going to be more nutrient dense. And if we look at a grocery store and we go around the perimeter of the grocery store, you're going to find that there lies the whole foods. So your produce section, your meat department, you're going to find dairy, eggs. These are all things on the outside of the grocery store. The perimeter of when you're in the grocery store, and the perimeter of that. Within the middle of the grocery store aisles, that's where you're going to find more processed foods. And these are foods that we want to limit because they're not going to be as nutrient dense. They're never going to be a processed food that contains more nutrition than a whole food. Some foods, though, are very nutrient dense and processed when it comes to certain green foods like spirulina and chlorella. These could be foods that are definitely processed to get them to us because we can't go down to I guess we could go down and start beachcombing for these things, but it's much easier to buy them and they are in a package. But one thing to look for is something that's been heated below 118 degrees because that keeps the enzymatic activity active so that the food is still a living food and it has maintained its nutrient density. And other than that, I just think that really when you're putting something in your mouth, just think about how much nutrients it has and how much it doesn't have. And that's a really good indicator of whether or not you should be maybe eating more or less of those foods. The other thing too is we want to make sure that our food is enjoyable. There's no point in trying to sit down and eat whole foods if every bite you're taking is making you sick or you can't stand it, because that also plays into the emotion around the food, and that can also bring about some stress when it comes to eating. So transitioning from a standard American diet, for example, into a more whole foods diet can take some time because we have to readjust our taste buds if they've been used to those excitotoxins that we often find in processed foods. Those aren't going to be in abundance in more whole foods, and it's definitely okay to use something like a Redmond salt or a Himalayan salt, something like that, to season the food. But oftentimes when we're looking at processed foods, they've got so many chemicals, MSG, which is just a flavor enhancer, these kinds of things. So really just making your food enjoyable by adding what you need to the whole food is really important. But all of that to say that it can take some time for whole foods to become enjoyable if you're not used to eating those types of foods in the first place. So that's also really important. And I also think it's important when it comes to talking about food and nutrition, about the connection that we have to the food and where it's coming from. And that's really important to support local farmers, to make sure that any of your food is coming from a well-sourced farm. And, it does take some research, but I think it's worth it. We don't want to be putting our money into supporting something like mass agriculture and commercial agriculture. I think everybody can, if you're mindful about eating, then you'll become mindful also about where your food is coming from. And that can take a little bit of research, but I think it's well worth it because, again, we're taking in the energy of the food and we want it to be nourishing us, and it's it does have an effect for sure. So I think that's really important as well. So those are just a few things that I think are really important when it comes to nutrition and making better choices, and just choosing whole foods, more whole foods, and researching where your food's coming from. It makes a difference. So that's my little bits of advice for today. Peace.